Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP vlog and podcast. So we do this vlog and podcast every Sunday at 8 a.m. London time, and it's just a really wrap up for the news for this week. So if I was to jump into it, we put some images up this week on the ZP website. The reason being is we talked about it, and we went to Spain and we did a webinar in not webinar, sorry, a live workshop in Spain with a couple of colleagues, one from Massive Sensors and one from ZP. And this entire workshop was over 3 hours long, so it was quite intense. We did lectures on voltammetry and amperometry and potentiometry and impedance spectroscopy, and then we also did live demonstrations to sort of let's say cement the learning from each one of these webinars. So we really appreciated the attendees. We had about 40 attendees. It was a hot day. There was a swimming pool outside, so we really appreciated that. People wanted to learn and attended our lectures. So so thank you very much to the attendees. It's just a little photo that we put up this week that at ZP we are strong sponsors of academia and universities, and this does include Swansea University, where ZP was the sponsor of the Innovation Awards at Swansea University. So as part of that, they'd made a video about us, and I just want to say hi to Saran. Nice to see you this morning, Saran. As part of that, they'd made a video about us, and there's a little picture that they took, and we put it up on the website there. Just some other news from Zimmer Peacock for this week. We had a very busy, I would say, almost webinar this week regarding questions that are coming from the ZP Developer Zone webinar. So every Thursday at 8 a.m. London time, we do this webinar specifically for sort of members and people asking technical questions. And one of the questions that had come up was regarding field effect transistors versus sort of, let's say, impedance sensors. So the particular question, I was interested in making a SARS-CoV-2 sensor, and the paper that they shared with us for measuring SARS-CoV-2 had a FET, a field effect transistor on it, and they were measuring the binding of SARS-CoV-2 type proteins to these SARS-CoV-2 antibodies using a FET device. And my argument in this was that when you use a FET device, you often measure some sort of change in surface through resistance, and that is good. You can get a signal out of it. But in let's say electrochemical biosensing, there's at least two properties of a surface you can measure. You can measure its resistance, and you can measure its capacitance. And so when people are actually measuring FET devices, they're often just looking at the resistive elements of that sensor, and they're not aware of or not measuring the capacitive elements of that sensor. And so at ZP, I just want to say a really warm welcome to Aftab, who joined us this morning. So what we said in that video was it's all very good to measure things like viruses using FET devices, but actually really consider using an impedance device. An impedance device will give you much more information about your assay than just a FET device. A FET will give you resistance measurements, that's great. An impedance device or impedance sensor will give you resistance and capacitance. And so for a little while, I've been sort of umming and ahhing or thinking about, when you use a FET device and when you use a more traditional electrochemical sensor. And I realized that people use FET devices when they come from an electronics background or a semiconductor fabrication background. If you read the resume of the professor or the principal investigator who's leading that project, as I say, they're often got an electronics background or a clean room or a MEMS background. And so when you read that they're basically making devices that they're essentially trained in. Now, obviously, I also suffer from that because I make devices that I'm trained in, which is electrochemical sensing. And so I am trying to take an impartial view and actually say, oh no, acknowledging my own bias towards electrochemistry, why would I argue that impedance sensors are better than FET sensors? And I would argue because actually you get much more information out of them. And sometimes your signal's not in the resistive element, it's actually in the capacitive element. Anyway, if you're interested in that, we do answer these very technical questions every Thursday at 8 a.m. London time in our weekly webinar. Now, there was another element from our weekly webinar I was particularly happy to talk about. We've been having some inquiries from seaweed. And I think 2/3 of the world's surface is covered in water. At the margins between land and the oceans, you obviously have these seaweed beds. And the simple interest for me has been recently that we are starting to realize that people are looking at this margin between land and water and saying, what resources can we bring from this? And I think it's correct because, you look at global population, you look at the strain that we're putting on the land that we have for farming. And so in some ways you could actually have more of a green farming if we were actually able to share that strain out over alternative sources of, I don't want to say food, but materials. And, seaweeds, at least it's an idea worth exploring. And I think it's fair to say, human society at the moment is in an exploratory stage when it comes to seaweed. I attended a webinar, I think it was this week or the week before, on seaweed as a source of materials for mankind. And then just to show you that it is a hot topic, we almost had an inquiry immediately asking the question, how do you measure heavy metals in seaweed? And because I have two excellent engineers online this morning, I just wanted to kind of tell the guys that people are interested in measuring heavy metals in seaweed. I think arsenic counts as a heavy metal, but heavy metals, arsenic, and I also was getting a sense that iodine/iodide is just a difference, almost in oxidation state. They're interested in this iodine, arsenic, and heavy metal measuring. And so I, in the video, talked about that you could actually blend, these semi-solids. Seaweed is is a very gelatinous material. You can blend it. You can put it onto something. You can put it onto screen printed electrode. You can measure the heavy metals in it using anodic stripping voltammetry. I think this is quite, let's say, doable. And I was also then expanding the idea that actually we could take our sensor rods that were originally developed for nitrate sensing, put those in the water, and actually constantly measure the heavy metal, arsenic, and iodine concentrations in the seawater itself. I was also saying in the video that's pretty tough. Putting anything in a marine environment, I think it's one of the most corrosive environments you can have. I'm sort of thinking, I'm laughing to myself at the moment. You've kind of got it's wet, it's salty. There's often strong sunlight. There's obviously the wind. There's the fact the water goes up and down. I mean, it's one of the most extreme environments. So what I said in the video was, it's actually quite achievable, I think, to be able to measure heavy metal content in the products themselves. I would call this like a point of need testing. You'd have the seaweed, you'd have to probably blend it, you'd put some of that slurry onto the sensor. We can make a point test on that slurry and give you some answers back. Obviously, the second one, putting the sensors into the environment and monitoring the environment, no, that's really quite tough. But we did talk about that in the video this week, and in the video in the ZP Developer Zone webinar this week. We also had an interesting inquiry about a molecule called EE2. I think EE2 is linked to fertility control, and and it's getting into the water environment. So with that, we just said, look, you could probably make an impedance electrochemical biosensor. So it did make me laugh because we'd had this sort of question about SARS-CoV-2, and there I'd argued make an impedance electrochemical biosensor, and then the next question was EE2, and the answer from the literature was make an impedance electrochemical biosensor. This might be interesting as well. I was quite pleased with this. Zimmer Peacock, we attended a conference this week in Loughborough. It was a very PhD centric conference because the speakers were basically people generally doing a PhD in electrochemistry, primarily I would say from the UK and a little bit of Ireland, and they were presenting on their research, and we were obviously exhibiting, but because we were able to sit in the audience, we were able to actually ask questions and get our answers back, and it was actually quite interesting, and I thought it was a great opportunity for both the students and for Zimmer Peacock. So at Zimmer Peacock, we were happy to attend that conference in Loughborough this week, and myself and a couple of engineers were able to attend that. I think this will make everyone smile, so I particularly want to address this to Saran and Aftab this morning. This is the power of electrochemistry. So we'd had an inquiry, and the inquirer wanted to measure some active materials in cough drops. And so depending on whether it's cherry, original, or extra strong, the cough drops have different concentrations of these active materials. Many organic molecules are actually electrochemically active. Traditionally, analytical chemists will look at these kind of organic molecules by absorption spectroscopy. We have these kind of spectrometers in our own labs at Zimmer Peacock, but it's not always easy to make a in-field absorption spectrometer assay. You have to make sure that the sample is clean. You have to exclude ambient light. So whenever I see a real world need for a low cost point of need device, I say, all right, let's use electrochemistry. So we knew that these different flavors of sweets, be it cherry original or extra strong, had different amounts of active materials in them. And we knew we were going to try and test it using electrochemistry. So what we did is we took these sweets, we dissolved them in buffer, and we have a little image on the website of that. And you can see, if you're watching the vlog, that they're different colors, and they're basically reflecting the color of the sweets themselves. And then we actually did the electrochemistry or voltammetry on these different solutions, and got very different voltammograms. And the voltammograms are, the extra strong, the cherry, the original. Actually, the voltammogram peaks are proportional. You would intuitively think that if somebody was going to give you an extra strong, that it would have more active materials. Well, the answer is it did. It gave us by far the most intense voltammogram. So we could sort of intuitively see that actually electrochemistry was measuring the active materials in this complex matrix. And it's a power of the science that you can take a sweet, you can have an instinct that, it essentially is going to have different electrochemical signatures depending on the flavors and what the amount of materials they put on it. We dissolved it in aqueous buffer. And that's important because, you don't want to be giving people harsh organic solvents, especially in a food type application. And generally, organic solvents can be a health risk to people, So, no, we took a sweet, put it in a water buffer, let's say, analyzed that, and got very distinctive voltammograms. And what we ended up doing with that is we used our accelerator platform. So this is an important thing now that we have if somebody wants to, for example, measure glucose in saliva, we could do a proof of principle for that very easily, because, so for example, what we would do is we would take the saliva, spike it with known amounts of glucose, and use our ZP accelerator to measure the sample, send the data to the cloud, and then we could actually analyze it. Now, I'm saying that because then in this case, somebody wanted to sort of have a way of categorizing or understanding their cough drop. Well, in that case, take the cough drop, dissolve it in buffer, put a drop onto the sensor, we analyze it and send the data to the cloud. So we have that immediate ability to go from essentially idea, we can execute the idea, we can get the data onto our Julie cloud really quite quickly. And so it's a very, let's say, accelerating way of doing science. It's probably worth saying that actually we often do these kind of proof of principle projects, and it's probably worth just saying that, I mean, we can do most things for about 22,000 euros, and we call that essentially our ZP accelerator. At least we can do what's called a proof of principle on that. So that was fun, and it works. It's always a good thing. Um, just a little bit of fun, really. We haven't actually released a new sensor in quite a while. At ZP, I would definitely argue that we have the world's widest range of commercially available biosensors on the market. And one of the sensors that we've put out this week is actually malic acid. I think malic acid appears a lot in the food and beverage industry. And so we do have a new sensor for that, so that if people are so interested and they need to do some proof of principles, they can buy some of these malic acid sensors from the ZP website. So thank you to the ZP team who did that. And then finally, Zimmer and Peacock, we are attending the Sensors Decade this week. I mention this now because unfortunately I am flying to Oslo, but I know we've got one of our engineers online that I'm not able to make down to Horton. It's such a busy week, but we're flying to Oslo and we're attending the Sensors Decade. And the Sensors Decade, I think, is Norway's first kind of conference around sensors and biosensors. And we're talking about the bridge between biology and the digital world. What I really love about the science and the business that we're growing is the world we live in is a world of chemistry and biology. The materials in your cough drop are chemical. The materials in your blood are often chemical and biological. The materials in your food could be capsaicin, for example, in chili. And electrochemistry is such a powerful scientific art that it can actually analyze cough drop blood chili, for example. We can detect the molecules of interest very easily and then actually send that data to our cloud. And the cloud is really our digital world. So it's very easy for us to go from chemical samples and biological samples, which could be related to food, beverage, agriculture, and health, and send that data to the cloud very quickly. And I think that's what that's what we're going to talk about in the Sensors Decade. That's, as I say, is being held in Oslo this week. I think sort of the conference itself is Wednesday and Thursday, and ZP will be exhibiting and speaking at that conference. So I basically want to say thank you very much for attending this morning, particularly to Saran and Aftab. If I was to kind of summarize, the week for Zimmer and Peacock, we've had a busy week in terms of, we've been on Sunday, we were in Spain doing a workshop. On Wednesday, we were back for the UK to do a conference in Loughborough. When you look at the science and engineering that we've put out this week, we've talked about measuring heavy metals in seaweed. We've talking about measuring a molecule called EE2, which is linked to human fertility. That was and that material is getting into the environment. We talked about SARS-CoV-2 and how to measure it with impedance sensors rather than FET type sensors. And you can see that it is busy because now we're talking about having to go to Norway for a conference next week. So I want to say very much thank you to everyone for attending. If you ever have any technical questions from Zimmer Peacock, contact us, and you'll find us able to answer those questions in our weekly webinar, which is every Thursday at 8 a.m. It's a very technical webinar, and we answer most of the technical questions there. So really, thank you very much. Take care, have a good week, and we will be doing this again next Sunday at 8 a.m. London time. Okay, thanks very much.